All right, 22 minutes before 10 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. I apologize to our next guest for running a tiny bit late. He's got a very interesting book. I am a fan of intelligent theological discussions. I'm a fan of that, but the word intelligence is part of that. Rabbi Joshua Hammerman is an award-winning journalist. He served Temple Beth El in Stamford, Connecticut for over 3 decades. He's a contributor to Times of Israel, the New York Jewish Week, the Washington Post, the New York Times Magazine, and he's on our show, and it's such an honor to have him. His book is called Mensch, Life Lessons of a Human Rabbi, Wisdom for Untethered Times, and I did find it on Amazon, and we'll find out what other websites you might want to go to. It's available as a Kindle as well as a paperback, and it says 2 other versions. Oh, let's see, there it is. Okay,
it's wonderful. It's a great book.
I was wondering if it was an audiobook. I like listening to audiobooks lately, Robin. Rabbi Joshua Hammerman, good morning, sir. It's an honor to have you on our show.
Hi, Larry. It's an honor to be here.
And I have to apologize. We were a little bit late because we had a curveball thrown to us. We had to catch it. So it's the best
no problem at all. I'm thrilled to be here. That's fine.
Because we're untethered.
Well, that's okay. And I'm a Mensch, so I'm okay with it.
All right. Help me out with that. What does that word mean?
Well, it's a great question because it's a Yiddish word that has not yet fully been integrated into English like kvetch and chutzpah and bagel, but it's a very important word. Just as the Eskimos have 50 words for snow, Mensch is one word that means 50 things. It means good person, but it means a lot more than that because the qualities of a Mensch are someone who has wisdom, kindness, honesty, compassion, benevolence, respect, trustworthiness, just about every positive personality characteristic you can imagine, all sort of wrapped into one package. And it's something the world needs right now.
So are there any perfect Mensches, or do we all have blemishes?
Well, actually, if you call yourself a Mensch, I don't mean you personally, but if one calls oneself a Mensch, then you're not one. Because
okay. All right. There's a paradox.
Because humility is part of being a Mensch, but also so is fallibility, and being able to see one's faults and be able to express remorse and sort of return from a wayward path. That's also the quality of a Mensch.
So do you think it's something we should strive to be? Is that maybe, I hate to ask you to give us the answer to the biggest question of all, what's the purpose of life? But I mean, do you think maybe that's why we're here, to learn how to be perfect?
Well, I think it's to try to be perfect, to strive for. We're never going to achieve it. But I do believe that all religions share the golden rule, and I think in some sense every religion has this ideal, this role model of someone who is kind and generous and altruistic and all of that. So unfortunately, English doesn't have a word for it. So that's why that's why I'm trying to push this notion that it should get beyond bar mitzvahs and funerals that I do, where I often will call someone a Mensch. It's not just Jews and it's not just men, even though the word in German does mean man.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but it's a human being of noble quality.
If I look at old photographs of myself, I'm going to tell you something. I was better looking when I was younger.
Yeah, me too.
But if I could look, I'm the only one who can look at those pictures and know what was going on inside my mind at that time and inside my heart. I'm a better person there today than I was then. I may have looked better, but I am better now, even though I don't look any better.
Yeah, I've been rabbi in this congregation for 30 years. I could tell you it beats you down, but it also lifts you up, and I feel I'm also a better person. The very brief chapters, these short essays that I call the benchmarks of my book, there are 42 of them. They're not chronological, although they span the last 30, 40 years. They're thematic. And so they sort of interact with one another, but there's no question that there's also been an evolution, a progress, that I've grown quite a bit over time, and you got to keep growing.
Do you reference passages from Scripture?
Oh yeah, a lot of them. And of course, it has somewhat of a Jewish slant to it because that's my background, but it really references universal truths and talks about situations that I've had to overcome in my life or challenges that I've faced and puts them in a spiritual context. Certainly choices that we have to make are not unique to us. They happened way back when and in biblical times as well.
But you also speak about how your life is mirroring the steps that the Israelites made.
Right, yes. So the 42 chapters, these mini chapters, these Mensch marks, which is sort of a play on benchmarks. And if you think it's corny, indulge me. I'm sorry, but they are stepping stones that parallel the Book of Numbers, the end of the Book of Numbers, where the stops are listed, almost in a map style, almost like it's going with a GPS. So these stops from Egypt, where the journey began, of course, to the Promised Land. And these 42 steps, according to a Hasidic leader named the Baal Shem Tov, who lived in the 18th century, reflect 42 stages of a person's life. So that's where I get the notion of Mensch marks. And it helped to give this a biblical tie-in, but it also helped to keep me on track so that this wouldn't be a book with 150 chapters, because it could very easily have sort of gotten out of control.
I like that you quote A.A. Milne from Winnie the Pooh. If you live to be 100, I want to live to be 100 minus one day, so I never have to live without you.
Yeah.
That is very emotional.
Yeah, I mean, Winnie the Pooh has been of course, in the news for a long time, but there have been some movies recently that have revived such an amazing work, and I see that as reflecting this nobility of normalcy that I think the heroic, everyday person, not the one who's in the news on the front pages, but the person who just works hard and supports a family and tries to be good. I mean, I see that as heroic, and I see Winnie the Pooh as a great example of that.
So the 42 essays, are these were these at one time sermons that you taught in synagogue?
Well, I have the advantage of being both a clergy and a journalist. When I studied at the seminary in New York, I was also going to NYU journalism school, so I was rabbi by day, journalist by night, which taught me a very important lesson on how to edit. Clergy sometimes are a little long-winded. So, I think the fact that most of these have appeared as essays, not as sermons, is significant because they are pretty brief. There are 1,000-word columns, many of them that appeared in the Jewish Week in New York and several other periodicals. But they also are from materials that I used in sermons, and in a couple of cases, entire sermons are included in the book.
I want to ask you about morality. One of the things in the book, and I have some samples of the book, it says, I've devoted my life to trying to become a more fully realized, morally evolved human being, a person of character. In today's world, it seems like it depends on who you ask what is moral and what is not moral. The answer is different. And I guess if we used the Bible as the key authority to answer those questions, it still becomes confusing. How do we know if something, especially when it comes to like human relationships, sexual things, for example, are often debated about whether it's moral or immoral?
Yeah, there's no question that there's an awful lot of gray area. There's a lot of middle ground and some excruciating choices that we have to make between, the bad and the worse. But there is, in my opinion, an objective sense of moral truth of right and wrong, and that's where we come to faith, and we come to our sources, in particular the Bible, and for Christians the New Testament, for Jews also the Talmud and other later literature. So I do think there is a clear need for direction, for moral direction right now. That's why I call these untethered times. And I'm not pointing toward one political viewpoint or another, sort of transcending them all, just a need for direction, for truth, and for honesty. Actually, I'll just give one example from the book of one of the Mensch marks that indicates, the tough choices you have to make, and clergy sort of lead the way on this. there was one time when my son, who was a teenager at the time, was brought into the emergency room at the local hospital. It fortunately was not life-threatening and turned out to be okay. But at the exact same time I brought him in, a congregant, someone in his 50s, basically, with very young children and a wife, he was brought in with a serious brain injury, which ultimately led to his death. And so here I was in the same emergency room, just a couple of beds down with my own son, and I had this excruciating, almost Sophie's Choice kind of thing, where I had to decide, do I want to be a good rabbi or do I want to be a good parent? And it seemed impossible to be both, because hopping from bed to bed, almost, if this had been the maternity ward, it would have been a sitcom. But, in the emergency room, it was tragic. But I was redeemed somewhat by the wife of the man who was dying, who at one point came in and peeked in on my own son and asked how he was doing in the midst of her turmoil. So I realized I'm not alone in all of this. This is a human endeavor, just trying to do the best you can. And I hopped from person to person and maybe failed at being a parent and a clergy, but in some way also succeeded.
Oh wow, that's a beautiful story. Actually, I mean, you're basically telling us that we're all in this together, and we just do the best you can to help the people that you are aware of that need help.
Right. I mean, I've had to overcome my own emotions. Yeah, I've become a better person by being clergy. There was one case again in the hospital where I heard that someone was there who had spent the better part of the last decade trying to get me fired, and so I was wondering, should I go visit him? Because if I visit him, it might kill him to see me. And on the other hand, I needed to overcome my own anger, my own feelings, my own mixed feelings, and do the right thing. And so I went. It turned out, it turned out that the person who it was not the person I thought it was. He just had the same name. So
that's good. That worked out good for you.
Yes, but everything was. We all lived happily ever after, except probably him, but it was okay.
We've had that too. Even here, Robert and I are not beloved by everybody. I don't know why, but people just don't like some people. It's hard to express why. And then, a few, and they'll let us know whatever. And so when
welcome to the club.
but then a few years later, they want to come on the show because they're doing something really good. Hey, can I come on the show? And we'll go. I'll talk to Robin behind the scenes. Oh my gosh, what am I supposed to do? So then they'll come in, and of course we're very cordial and thanks. And at the end of the whole thing, we say, well, thank you for what you're doing, and then they leave. And I always think, well, did we fix whatever the problem was? I don't know. I don't know, because we don't always know what the problem is. I think what it sounds like in your case, I think people in authority, and a rabbi is a person of authority, I think maybe that person just didn't like you being in that position for whatever reason.
Well, I probably made a few mistakes too. An important part of being a mensch is owning that kind of thing, and occasionally, maybe, but sometimes it's just a matter, at the repast, the kiddush as we call it, after the service, I may have turned my shoulder in one direction and he thought I was turning it away from him. Who knows? And it could be as simple as that.
Well, you totally bared your soul in this book. It is a roadmap throughout your whole life, and you speak about your brother Mark.
Yeah, he has a Fragile X syndrome, and of course I didn't know that until I was in my 20s or so, because the science hadn't advanced to that point. But he's severely intellectually challenged, and he's just a year younger than me. So I understood, especially when I saw the genetic nature of it, that that really he and I are basically two sides of the same coin, and what he has endured his whole life could so easily have been me. And I understand, and he also has taught me quite a bit in terms of just being sensitive to those who are more vulnerable in our society. Yeah. So it was important to write about him.
Oh, are you near a pigeon? Do I hear a pigeon behind you? Where are you? Is there a pigeon?
my other phone was ringing, but no.
Oh, okay, okay. It sounded like a pigeon. Didn't it sound like a pigeon?
I'm indoors. No. Yeah, no, the phone rang, well, I have no idea. But I wasn't going to put you on hold, so don't worry.
I know, I'm sorry.
All right, so I worked at a juvenile detention center for a while, and when I worked there, the kids who were bad were bad. they were just a hard to deal with person, but they were kids. Like, when I say kids, 16, maybe 17.
Yeah.
And so if I worked the night shift, I would have to look in the rooms, make sure everybody was sleeping. And you look at these children, and you say, oh, my gosh, that's the same young... Look how innocent he looks. And in the daytime, he's such a terror. And I think when you talk about people who are handicapped in some way, special needs people, it is a way to see that, well, maybe there's an innocence in all of us that we all have, but there's also this other side that we all have. And I guess it just depends on how much we tether it, to use your word, right?
Right. Well, in Jewish tradition, it's believed that every human being has a spark of God, a spark of divinity in him or her. Doesn't matter what your faith or your background or how many crimes you've committed, so there is something in each of us that we all share, that something is very, very sacred. And if you look at the person that you're talking to and realize that there is in a sense you're looking at God, it changes your perspective. It certainly changes the sense. There's no hierarchy. No one is better than anyone else. We're all equal in that sense. Well,
you say in your book, sometimes fulfilling God's command can only be done by violating it.
Yeah, that was an interesting benchmark. There, a couple of teenagers in my congregation got very involved after Parkland last year in the local high schools activities responding to it, and including the march that happened. And it happened on a Saturday, which on the Sabbath I normally don't drive, but wanting to support them and knowing how important my support would be for those teenagers in my congregation and just in general, I made the decision to take transportation, basically to drive to the march. Now, the Jewish tradition says that it's okay to disobey Sabbath laws if it's going to save a life. And I could justify it, although a bit of a stretch, with the belief that my participation and the participation of others in such activities could save lives. So anyway, yes, sometimes, and I do believe that God wants us to challenge and not just to accept passively all the laws that have been given us.
I guess you have to really think it through, though, if you're trying to make that. That's a tough one, right? There's so many different stories you could fit into that way of thinking. Do you know, when you go back to the spark of God in all of us...
By the way, that phone is ringing again. I have no idea why.
It's a pigeon. It's a pigeon.
It's not a pigeon.
There's a bird who wants some food. I'm not sure what...
It has not gotten as warm up here as it is down there.
Where are you?
I'm in Stamford, Connecticut.
Oh, in Connecticut. Well,
yes.
Okay, yeah, I did see that. But your publisher is here in Florida, right? Is that right?
Right, yeah, HCI, Health Communications. They originally did the Chicken Soup for the Soul books and all of that. Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. You fit right in with that whole group.
Well, they're great. They're great.
And the spark of God in all of us is in Christianity, I'm sure you know. The one thing that Jesus said, what you have done to the least of these, you've also done to me. And I'm horrible at quoting scripture, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, sure.
And I think that's the same thing. It's the same thing as, if you see somebody... I see this guy on the corner all the time, looking for handouts. He's in the median where I turn left. And I always feel bad because I don't know if I'm hurting him or helping him by giving him money. I don't know. Sometimes I think it hurts him more to help him, if that makes sense.
Well, there are always tough calls to make in situations like that. But, I do a lot of work, a lot of interfaith work here in my community as well. I'm very involved in our local interfaith council. And this kind of dialogue, this conversation, sort of enhances the sense that God is among us all. And, my hope is that this word, Mensch, will make it out. And obviously, I want the book to sell, but I really do feel it can make a contribution to society as a whole and get beyond, being sort of parochial as a Jewish term, sort of like the bagel, I guess. And so my hope is maybe to have a Million Mensch March at some point. Now, that would be very hard to organize. So I would see a Million Mensch March as taking place in a million different places, where every person just does one thing to bring a little more kindness to the world.
But the truth is, it would be a 999,999 Mensch Mark, because you can't call yourself a Mensch.
Right.
Everybody else is one, but you're not one.
So we would need 1,000,001 then, just to make sure.
And I love the fact that you're also a humorist. I mean, this is a wonderful read, the way you've written your book, and it's very enchanting. I just love it.
Humor is another Mensch-like quality. I mean, you have to be humorous to be humble. You need to be a little self-effacing. And it also helps to sort of get us out of the daily drudgery. There's a quote that I also want to make sure gets out there by a rabbi who lived in the 19th century called Israel Salanter. He was a real moralist. And he said, at first I tried to change the world and failed. Then I tried to change my city and failed. Then I tried to change my family and failed. Finally, I tried to change myself, and then I was able to change the world.
Wow.
So the million Mensches are all going to try to change ourselves, and then in some way we'll bring some more civility to the world.
I love that. Okay. That's just what I meant at the beginning. Intelligent theological discussions. I don't even know if theology even applies in this case. Just intelligent discussions. Rabbi Joshua Hammerman, the book again is called Mensch Marks. I found it on Amazon. You're already doing pretty well.
Yeah, I'm doing well, but I can't say that because that wouldn't be humble. But,
well, I will say it.
Right.
You are doing well. You got a lot of, you got like a 5-star review, and let's see, like 200 something on the.
I was #1 among Judaism books this morning, which
my gosh,
and new books, so that Judaism books, which is great. But again, I wanted to get beyond Judaism, and the word Mensch is MENSCH, in case people are having some trouble finding it.
And that's your website, right?
I have a website, menschmarks.com. Right, one word.
All right, menschmarks.com. Okay, I'm going to get it myself. Thank you for being on the air with us today. Oh, I have a copy of it.
Yes, we
so
have.
Let me give away the copy to a listener. I'm going to buy my own copy. If you would like a copy of Mensch Marks, call me right now, 622-9622. We'll put your name on it. It'll be waiting for you. I and the rest of us have to go buy it. Thank you so much, Rabbi.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, we'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Here is your 1-minute news